The United States government thought it had erased them. In 1838, 7,000 soldiers swept through the mountains of Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama. They kicked open doors. They pulled families out of their homes, wearing only the clothes on their backs. They marched 16,000 Cherokee people west through summer heat, through autumn rain, through the bitter cold of a killing winter. The survivors called it Nuna Dal Tsuni, the trail where they cried. Approximately 4,000 people died before they ever reached what the government coldly called Indian Territory. 1 in 4. Gone. The United States government thought it had erased them. It had not. The Cherokee survived. They rebuilt. They endured. And today, in 2025, the Cherokee Nation is the single largest federally recognized tribe in the entire United States, with more than 466,000 enrolled citizens. They have a government, a court system, a university, a healthcare network, a language preservation program fighting to keep one of the most sophisticated writing systems ever created by any Indigenous people on Earth alive into the next generation. The government tried to erase them. It failed completely. But here's the thing about the Cherokee that nobody expected. The harder scientists looked at their DNA, the more they realized that even the story told before the Trail of Tears, the story of where they came from, who they were, and how long they had been there, was wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong, in a way that raises questions about the entire history of how human beings first came to the Americas. And when the DNA results started coming back, they pointed not toward Siberia, not toward the Bering Land Bridge, not toward the standard model that every textbook in every classroom has been teaching for decades. They pointed toward the Middle East. They pointed toward ancient Egypt and the Levant. They pointed toward a mystery so deep and so strange that mainstream scientists are still arguing about it today in laboratories, in journals, in archaeological sites across the continent. This is the story of what Cherokee DNA actually says, and it will change the way you think about American history. To understand why the DNA findings hit the scientific world like a hammer, you first need to understand the model that everyone believed before them. The standard story of how people came to the Americas is called the Beringian migration model. It goes like this. During the last ice age, somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago, sea levels across the planet dropped dramatically because so much of the world's water was locked up in glaciers and ice sheets. When sea levels dropped, a land bridge emerged between what is now Siberia in Northeast Asia and what is now Alaska. This land corridor, called Beringia, was not a narrow strip of land. It was enormous, sometimes hundreds of miles wide, and it was passable on foot. The ancestors of all Native American peoples, according to this model, crossed that land bridge from Northeast Asia. They were hunter-gatherers, following game, perhaps not even aware they were entering a new continent. They spread south and east across the Americas over thousands of years, reaching the tip of South America, the islands of the Caribbean, the valleys of the Appalachians, and every corner of 2 continents. The Cherokee, under this model, were descendants of those original Beringian crossers. Their ancestors walked from Siberia to Alaska and eventually spread south and east until they reached the lush valleys and mountains of the southern Appalachians, where they built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in North America. The genetic evidence that supports this model is real and strong. 4 primary groups in mitochondrial DNA, which is the genetic material passed exclusively from mother to child through the maternal line, are found in Native American populations across both continents. These 4 groups, named A, B, C, and D, are also found in the Siberian populations that are believed to have crossed Beringia. The model works for all 4 of them. The DNA lines up, the geography lines up, the timeline lines up, the science seemed settled. Then they looked at the Cherokee, and they found a 5th group. Mitochondrial DNA haplogroup X is one of the rarest and most mysterious genetic markers in the entire human story. It is present in only about 3% of all living human beings worldwide. But where it appears is extraordinarily specific. In Europe, haplogroup X is concentrated along the Atlantic coast and in the British Isles. In the Middle East, it is found among the Druze people of Lebanon and Israel, in Jordanian and Lebanese populations, and in ancient Levantine populations whose genomes have been recovered from archaeological sites thousands of years old. In the Caucasus Mountains, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, it is found in Georgian and Armenian populations. In North Africa, it appears in small but detectable amounts. And in North America, it appears in a very specific and very striking pattern. It is concentrated in the Great Lakes region, in the Algonquian-speaking populations of the Northeast, in the Ojibwe, in the Iroquois. And then it appears at its single highest concentration anywhere in the Americas in one specific population, the Cherokee, the southernmost major concentration of haplogroup X in the entire Western Hemisphere. Approximately 25% of Cherokee maternal lineages carry haplogroup X, 1 in 4 Cherokee women. the same haplogroup found in the ancient Middle East, in the Levant, in Lebanon, in ancient Egypt's neighbors, the haplogroup that the Beringian crossing model cannot explain. Here is why that matters so much. The Beringian model makes a very specific prediction. Any haplogroup found in Native American populations today should also be found in the Siberian populations that crossed the land bridge, because that is where the Native American populations came from. Haplogroups A, B, C, and D fulfill that prediction perfectly. They are in Siberia, they are in Alaska, they are across the Americas. The model works, but haplogroup X does not fulfill that prediction. Siberian populations show essentially no haplogroup X. The Northeast Asian populations that preceded the crossing show essentially no haplogroup X. The populations along the Beringian corridor show essentially no haplogroup X. So where did it come from? How did a genetic marker concentrated in the ancient Middle East and Mediterranean end up inside the DNA of 1 in 4 Cherokee women? There is no easy answer. There is no consensus answer. What there is 3 competing scientific explanations, each one more fascinating and more disturbing to the standard model than the last. The first explanation is the one that mainstream archaeologists hate the most but cannot fully dismiss. It is called pre-Columbian Atlantic contact. Back in the 1990s, before genetic technology had developed enough to resolve the question definitively, researchers at Emory University and the University of Arizona looked at the distribution of haplogroup X and proposed something radical. They suggested that haplogroup X may have arrived in North America not through Beringia at all, but through a completely different route, a transatlantic route. Ancient peoples from the Iberian Peninsula, from what is now Portugal and Spain, or from the British Isles, carrying haplogroup X in their maternal lineages, may have crossed the North Atlantic Ocean using the edges of glacial ice as a corridor, following the ice shelf, hunting seals and fish, moving slowly westward across what is now the North Atlantic, eventually reaching the eastern seaboard of North America. This model, in its archaeological form, is called the Solutrean hypothesis. It proposes cultural and genetic contact between Western Europe and Eastern North America as far back as 20,000 years ago or more. If correct, haplogroup X did not come from Asia at all. It came from Europe. It crossed the Atlantic, not the Pacific. And the Cherokee, as the southernmost major population carrying it in the Americas, might carry the genetic legacy of an ancient Atlantic contact that predates Columbus by tens of thousands of years. Most mainstream archaeologists reject the Solutrean hypothesis as insufficiently evidenced. The stone tool parallels that were originally used to support it have been questioned and criticized. The ocean crossing logistics have been called implausible by many researchers. But the genetic presence of haplogroup X in Cherokee populations is precisely the kind of finding that the Atlantic contact model would predict. And the debate, after decades, has never been cleanly closed. The door remains open, just slightly, but open. The second explanation tries to save the standard Beringian model without admitting any transatlantic contact. Some researchers argue that haplogroup X was present in Northeast Asian populations 15,000 years ago, but has since disappeared from those populations through a process called genetic drift. Genetic drift is the random loss of genetic variation in small, isolated populations over very long periods of time. In a small population, certain genetic variants can simply disappear by random chance over many generations if the people carrying them happen not to reproduce or reproduce less than others. It requires no disaster. It requires no selection pressure. It is just the randomness of who has children and who does not, compounded over thousands of years. Under this explanation, haplogroup X crossed the Bering Land Bridge with the original founding populations around 15,000 years ago. It survived in North America, in the Cherokee and Great Lakes populations, because those populations maintained it through their maternal lines across hundreds of generations. Meanwhile, back in Northeast Asia, haplogroup X simply vanished from the population through random genetic loss over the same 15,000 years. This explanation is scientifically possible. Genetic drift is real. It happens. It has been documented in many isolated populations, but it requires accepting a very specific and very convenient pattern. Haplogroup X somehow survived in the Americas while disappearing from exactly the place the model says it should have come from. It is present everywhere the model cannot easily explain, and absent everywhere the model predicts it should be present. That level of coincidence makes some researchers deeply uncomfortable. It feels less like science and more like explaining away an inconvenient fact. The third explanation is the newest, and in many ways the most important. In 2021, a landmark study published in the journal Science performed the most comprehensive ancient DNA analysis of Native American populations ever conducted up to that point. Researchers sequenced ancient genomes from across the Americas, including populations that had never previously been studied at the genetic level. What they found was not what the single migration model predicted. They identified what they called deep population structure within the Americas, evidence that the founding populations of the two continents were not a single homogeneous group that crossed Beringia and spread uniformly in all directions. They were multiple distinct populations with different genetic ancestries. Some may have taken different routes, some may have arrived at different times. The founding of the Americas was not one event. It was a process, complicated, multi-stage, involving different peoples from different places arriving through different corridors over different periods of time. And within that analysis, the Cherokee ancestral population showed something extraordinary. Their genetic signatures traced to an ancient founding lineage that was distinct from the populations that produced most other Native American groups. A lineage that either partially predated the main Beringian migration or took a different path through it. A lineage that carried haplogroup X, not because of contact with Europeans after Columbus, not because of random drift in Siberia, but because the Cherokee descended from a founding population that was always genetically different from the people around them. A population that may have been present in the Americas longer than the Standard Model accounts for, or that arrived through a route the Standard Model does not include. This finding does not resolve the debate. It does not tell us where haplogroup X ultimately came from, or how it got into the Cherokee ancestral lineage, but it shifts the entire question. The question is no longer simply, where did haplogroup X come from? The question is, who were the ancient people who carried it, and what is their relationship to the people who became the Cherokee? Now add the Y chromosome evidence. If the mitochondrial DNA tells the story of the maternal line, the Y chromosome tells the story of the paternal line. And on the paternal side, the Cherokee data produces something equally difficult to explain within the Standard Model. Cherokee Y chromosome data shows the expected haplogroups for Native American populations, primarily haplogroup Q1A, which is consistent with Beringian ancestry. But within that data, researchers have identified specific Y chromosome signatures carrying markers associated with Middle Eastern and Mediterranean populations. Haplogroup T, in particular, a Y chromosome haplogroup concentrated in the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, and the ancient Levant, has appeared in Cherokee genealogical samples at frequencies that require explanation. Haplogroup T is extraordinarily rare in Native American populations generally. Its presence in Cherokee samples, even at relatively low frequencies, points toward an ancestral connection that the Standard Model does not account for. Researcher Donald Yates, publishing through the Journal of Genetic Genealogy, characterized the mitochondrial DNA of Cherokee individuals who did not display any of the usual Native American haplogroups A through D. What he found, in order of frequency, were haplogroups T, U, X, J, H, L, and K. Haplogroups T, X, and J are essentially Levantine in origin, concentrated in the Eastern Mediterranean world. The study's reviewer concluded that the distribution of these haplogroups was evidently ancient, and critically, was not the result of recent European or Middle Eastern admixture after 1492. The proportions, the specific haplotypes within each haplogroup, and the frequencies found in Cherokee samples are quite different from what you would expect to see from post-colonial European gene flow. Similar proportions of these haplogroups are found in the populations of Egypt, Israel, and other parts of the East Mediterranean. As one researcher noted directly, no such mix could result from post-1492 European gene flow into the Cherokee Nation. This is the detail that stops the conversation cold, because the easiest explanation when you find European or Middle Eastern DNA in a Native American population is to say it got there after Columbus. European colonizers arrived. They mixed with native populations. Some European genes entered the Cherokee bloodline in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. Case closed. But the genetic analysis says that explanation does not work here. The specific variants, the specific haplotypes within each haplogroup do not match the European populations that would have been mixing with Cherokee people in the colonial period. The signal is too old. It was there before Columbus, before any European set foot on the continent, which means it arrived some other way, at some other time, from some other direction. Now, step back from the genetics for a moment, because there is a layer to this story that science is only now beginning to catch up with. The Cherokee oral tradition has always said something completely different from the textbook model. Cherokee origin stories do not describe a migration from the north. They do not tell of ancestors crossing a land bridge from Siberia. They describe a people who emerged from the land itself, who were always in the southern Appalachians, who had been there since before memory could reach. The Cherokee call themselves Ani-Yunwia, the principal people, not a name that speaks of migration, a name that speaks of belonging, of being original, of being first. For generations, scholars dismissed these origin stories as mythology, beautiful perhaps, spiritually meaningful certainly, but historically inaccurate. The comfortable assumption of Western academia was that indigenous oral traditions were metaphorical, not literal, that when the Cherokee said they had always been there, they meant something poetic, not something factual, that the real history was the Beringian crossing, and the oral tradition was simply the Cherokees' way of expressing their deep attachment to the land. The DNA evidence is forcing a reconsideration of that assumption. If the Cherokee ancestral population was genetically distinct from the main Beringian founding populations, if their lineage traces to a different source that either predates the standard migration or arrived through a different route, then their oral tradition of deep and ancient and original connection to the land of the southern Appalachians may not be metaphorical at all. It may be accurate memory, the knowledge of a people who understood through hundreds of generations of oral transmission, passed from grandmother to granddaughter across thousands of years without a single written word, that they were different, that their origins were not the same as the people around them, that their connection to those specific mountains, those specific rivers, those specific valleys ran deeper than anyone else's, because they had been there longer than anyone else, or arrived through a path that no one had mapped. Genetic memory is a concept that scientists are careful with, and rightly so. But there is something profound about a people who insisted, even while being marched at gunpoint across 9 states in the dead of winter, that those mountains in the distance were their home, their true and original home, not the place they had settled, the place they had always been. Now consider what this means for the bigger picture. The Cherokee DNA findings are not just about the Cherokee. If the Beringian model cannot account for haplogroup X in the Cherokee, it raises an urgent question about what else it cannot account for. What other genetic signals exist in other Native American populations that have not yet been fully sequenced or fully explained? What other founding lineages contributed to the genetic heritage of the Americas that the single migration model is missing entirely? The ancient DNA studies of the Americas are still in their early stages compared to the depth of analysis conducted on European and Asian populations. The 2021 landmark study was a beginning, not a conclusion. Future studies with larger sample sizes, deeper genomic sequencing, and more comprehensive geographic and temporal coverage will produce findings that further complicate and enrich the picture. There are already hints of what is coming. The Kennewick man, whose remains were found in Washington state in 1996 and dated to approximately 9,000 years ago, showed skeletal features that researchers initially said did not match modern Native American populations. The Spirit Cave mummy from Nevada, approximately 10,000 years old, showed genetic links to a population that contributed ancestry to Native Americans across the continent, but whose relationship to specific modern tribes was complex and contested. The Enzick child from Montana, approximately 12,600 years old, showed genetic relatedness to modern Native American populations, but with specific divergences that the single migration model had trouble fully explaining. Every ancient genome that comes out of the Americas adds another data point to a picture that looks less and less like a single clean migration from one place through one corridor at one time. And in the middle of all of this complexity, the Cherokee sit as perhaps the most striking example of how much the standard story left out. A people whose textbook origins pointed simply to the Beringian crossing. A people whose DNA says something far older, far stranger, and far more interesting. A people who told us, for centuries, in their own language and their own stories, that they had always been there, and a genetic record that is now, slowly and imperfectly, beginning to suggest they may have been right. The Cherokee Nation today is extraordinary. Over 466,000 enrolled citizens as of 2024, making it the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States. More than 141,000 Cherokee citizens live within the tribe's reservation boundaries in northeastern Oklahoma, the land their ancestors were forced marched to in 1838 and 1839. The tribe operates with a budget of approximately $3.65 billion for fiscal year 2025, supporting healthcare for hundreds of thousands of patients, education programs for tens of thousands of students, housing initiatives, economic development, and the most ambitious language preservation effort in the tribe's modern history. The Cherokee language, Tsalagi, has only approximately 1,500 first language speakers remaining, most of them over the age of 70. Without the current preservation programs, it faces extinction within a generation. A people who survived the Trail of Tears, who survived the forced assimilation boarding schools of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, where children were taken from their families, forbidden to speak their language, punished for practicing their culture, and told that their identity was something to be ashamed of, who survived systematic legal erasure across more than a century, who rebuilt, who preserved, who are still here, 187 years after the United States government tried to solve what it called the Cherokee problem by marching them into the winter and hoping enough of them would die. They are still here, and their DNA is still talking. buried within the genetic record of the Cherokee Nation, in the 25% of Cherokee women who carry haplogroup X, in the Y chromosome signatures that point toward the ancient Middle East, in the ancient founding lineage identified by the 2021 science study, in the oral traditions that scholars dismissed for 2 centuries and that the genetics is now beginning to vindicate, is an older story. A story about who they were before the Trail of Tears, before European contact, before the written record begins, before the standard model was invented to explain them. A story that has not been fully told yet because the science is not yet complete. The ancient genomes are still being sequenced, and the debate is still open in every laboratory and every journal that is working on this question. The Cherokee were never exactly who the textbook said they were. Their origins were always more complex, more ancient, and more mysterious than the simple model allowed. The DNA did not create that mystery. The DNA revealed it. The mystery was always there, written into the maternal lineages of 1 in 4 Cherokee women, waiting for a technology that could finally read what the land already knew. And in the mountains of North Carolina, where a small group of Cherokee hid in the high ridges during the forced removal of 1838 rather than surrender to the soldiers, where they stayed and refused to leave and eventually earned the legal right to remain, the land still holds that story. The same mountains the Cherokee say they came from, the same mountains the DNA says their ancestors were always connected to. The same mountains that 187 years ago soldiers tried to empty and could not completely empty because some people simply refused to leave the place they had always been. The science is still writing the end of this story, but the Cherokee have always known the beginning.